This Torah portion is called Mikeitz, which means at the end of. So it is at the end of 2 years, which one would assume would be 2 years from the events of the last Torah portion, which was when Joseph interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the bakers, and they turned out to be true interpretations. So the portion begins with some dreams of the Pharaoh. He's standing by the canal, which could also be the Nile, and he sees 7 healthy cows grazing in the swamp grass. And then 7 more cows emerge, and they're very gaunt, very thin-fleshed, and they eat the healthy cows. So the Pharaoh goes back to sleep, and he has another dream. Interesting, they're paired dreams, kind of like the dreams of Joseph, which got him into so much trouble in the first place. So in this dream, Pharaoh sees some grain. 7 ears of grain are growing out of one stalk, and those ears are beautiful. They're healthy and plump. And then 7 more ears appear, which are scorched and blighted and thin and hard, and they eat the 7 good ears. So Pharaoh seeks interpretations from his court, and nobody's able to interpret. Then the cupbearer, the chief cupbearer, speaks up and reminds, or speaks up finally, about the skills of interpreting that Joseph has got. So he mentions that there's a young Hebrew slave in the prison who's good at interpreting dreams, and perhaps the Pharaoh ought to check with him, because the 2 dreams that both the baker and I dreamt were accurately interpreted. So they call for Joseph, who's rushed out of the prison. He's shaved, he's put into some new nice clothes, and he's completely unfazed. I mean, he just walks right into the situation and performs. So the Pharaoh then describes his dreams to Joseph, slight variations from the narrator's account, which is the first account. And there's a third recounting of the dreams in an abbreviated, summarized form by Joseph, but there's basically 3 recountings of the dreams, and each of them is slightly different, especially the third, the summary of the dreams by Joseph. If my 1,000+ page translation and commentary of Genesis ever sees the light of day, you can read the differences among those 3 tellings of the dreams and what they might be signifying, but not this time around. So he tells the dreams to Joseph, and Joseph interprets them. He likewise. In the last portion, where Joseph interprets the dreams of the 2 officers, he claims no ownership of interpretation. In both cases, both back then and as you'll see now, he gives all the credit to God, and that the interpretations being true are for the welfare of the person to whom the interpretation is being given. So Joseph cuts right to the chase. He tells Pharaoh there's one dream, or it's a dream about one thing, or 2 dreams about one thing. Basically, 7 years of plenty are coming, represented by the 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy grains, or the 7 healthy ears of grain. And those years of plenty are going to be abundant. And upon the heels of the 7 years of plenty will begin 7 years of famine, which will be crushing. The repetition of the dream indicates that this is going to happen. It's going to happen right away. So, kind of going beyond the call of duty, Joseph makes or gives some advice to Pharaoh, suggesting that he appoint someone as an overseer of the agricultural activity of Egypt in order to prepare for the famine. So Pharaoh exclaims, there's no one smarter than you are. You're obviously inspired by God, so you're the man. So they appoint Joseph to be second in command of Pharaoh. They change his name, or they give him an extra name, an Egyptian name. They give him a signet ring of the Pharaoh. They give him new clothes. They put him in a chariot which is the second of the best chariots, and they give him a wife. So the woman that is assigned to him or given to him as a wife is the daughter of the priest of On, the Kohen of On, the priest of On, and his name is Potiphera, which is quite similar to the name Potiphar, who was the person who originally purchased Joseph in Egypt. Most of the commentators think these are two different people. There's Potiphar and Potiphera, but the similarity of the names I don't think is a coincidence. So the 7 years of plenty begin, and the land produces just a ton of food. And Joseph stores it and specially builds storage cities in order to forestall the effects of the upcoming famine. And then the story switches a bit, narrating that during these years of plenty, Joseph and his wife have two sons, one named Ephraim and one named Manasseh, or Manassas. And they both have to do with how Joseph is feeling about being in Egypt, that he's forgotten his family, but that God is making him fruitful. So the years of the famine begin, and they're really terrible. And the people come clamoring to Pharaoh for food. And he tells them to go to Joseph to buy food through the administration which he established during those 7 years of plenty. And it's a widespread famine. It also affects Canaan. And all the surrounding nations are coming to purchase food from Egypt, the grain which was stored up. Now it's interesting that the Egyptians were storing up all of this food, and the rest of the adjoining countries must have seen what was going on. So you wonder why they didn't prepare better. Or the story may be that only Egypt was producing grain in such abundance. So the famine affects Canaan, and Jacob tells his sons to go down to Egypt and to buy grain. 10 of them make the trip. The youngest is Benjamin, who's also the son of Rachel, who is Jacob's favorite wife, which means that Benjamin and Joseph are brothers, or full brothers. And because of the status of Benjamin vis-a-vis Rachel, Jacob won't send him down with the other 10 brothers because Rachel died on the road and there's dangers on the road, so he couldn't stand the prospect of losing the other and the last of his kids with Rachel. So the 10 brothers come down. They're standing in line to buy food. Joseph is overseeing everything, and he recognizes the brothers, but they don't recognize him. 23 years have passed, more or less, since the sale of Joseph down to Egypt. So he's 40 years old. Well, so 13 years have passed since the selling of Joseph into slavery. And he's obviously dressed differently. Now he has a beard, all the regalia, and the brothers do not recognize him. So Joseph remembers his dream, the first dream anyway, of the sheaves bowing down to him. So Joseph begins this scheme. He accuses the brothers of being spies, that they're coming down to spy out the land. So the brothers give a little too much information. There's 10 of them, which is a little suspicious, and that's one of the things that ostensibly gets Joseph to be able to accuse them of being spies, that they're coming as a spying party. But you wouldn't think that 10 spies would come all together to spy out. They'd be spread across the land. So the brothers speak up and say, no, we're not spies. We're the son of one man. That's the reason that we're traveling together. Joseph continues to accuse them of being spies, and he throws all of them in prison. And he works out an arrangement where he tells them that I will believe you're not spies if you bring your youngest brother down with you the next time you come to purchase food. So the younger brother, Benjamin, would be able to vouch for the veracity of the son's or of the other brother's claim, or it would indicate that Benjamin was still alive or that Jacob was still alive. It's a little complicated why exactly he wants this to take place. Probably the most cogent understanding is that he wants to see if the brothers have changed, if they will look after the youngest son or the youngest brother, the favorite of Jacob, the last remaining kid of Rachel. Would they pull the same stunt with Benjamin as they did with Joseph? And to see if they've repented. If they have repented, they would be faced with the same situation, but they would choose to do differently. That's a couple of the criteria of repentance. You admit that you've done something wrong, you feel bad about it, you make recompense possible. But one of the criteria is that if you're faced with the same situation again, that you wouldn't do it. So after 3 days in the keep, Joseph releases all of them other than Simon. Simon is still in prison. But he speaks to the other brothers and he tells them to pack up their food that they've purchased. And if they do want to come again to buy food in Egypt, they need to bring their youngest brother with them. Now, during some of these discussions, the brothers bemoan their fate. And they think it's because of them having mistreated Joseph years ago. Now, they don't know that Joseph can understand Hebrew because he's speaking in Egyptian and he has an interpreter in between himself and the brothers. But still, he's moved by their expressions of remorse. The story or the overhearing by Joseph of the brother's remorse makes him cry, and he has to excuse himself, comes back and continues apace. So the attendants of Joseph pack up the saddlebags full of food, and the attendants also return the money that the brothers used to pay for the food. So the brothers are on their way back to Canaan. One of them, when they stop at the lodge, opens up his saddlebag, presumably to feed his donkey, who may have been the weakest of the lot and needed to be fed more often. And he sees his money in the saddlebag. And so he tells the other brothers, and they all freak out, and they understand it as punishment from God for their mistreatment of Joseph those years ago. So they return to Canaan, speak to Jacob, and they say, we met this really mean overseer, and he asked us all kinds of questions, and we told him about Benjamin, and he has commanded us to not return to Egypt if we need to buy more food without Benjamin. So Jacob is distraught, and they don't bring home Simon either. So he's lost 2 sons because of whatever the rest of the sons are doing. So they open up their saddlebags, all of them, and all of them see that all of their saddlebags have got the returned money, and they're pretty distraught. Now Reuben speaks up. He's kind of the one who also slept with Jacob's concubine Bilhah. So Reuben was supposed to save Joseph as well from the pit by coming back to rescue him. So Reuben's not having a very easy life. Well, so Reuben speaks up and he says, I'll go down, give me Benjamin, and if I don't come back, you can kill my 2 sons. So Jacob states quite clearly that's not going to happen, that he's just going to mourn until he dies. Because if anything would happen to Benjamin on the way, it would be the end for Jacob. So some time passes and the famine is continuing, and Jacob and his household are running out of food. So Judah ends up making a deal instead of him going down with the rest of them. But he would be responsible for Benjamin. And if he's unable to bring him back, then he will have sinned against Jacob forever, rather than the more improbable outcome of killing 2 of his sons. Jacob reminds the sons that they gave Joseph, or the person they didn't know was Joseph, too much information, especially about Benjamin. And the brothers kind of make up a story saying that it was because of Joseph that they disclosed that information, but if you read back a few pages, it was them volunteering that information. Well, so Jacob relents and he says, well, okay, you gotta go, but bring some tribute, a mincha, a gift, an offering. And these things are representative of the bounty of the land of Canaan when it's not suffering from famine. So those things, at least according to the Art Scroll translation, are balsam and honey, wax, lotus, pistachios, and almonds. The lotus is Lot, which is the name of Lot. And Lot also means laudanum, so it might not be lotus that is the most appropriate translation for Lot in this context. So Jacob also tells them to take twice the money, one to repay what was returned and one part to buy some more grain. So they all make their way down, including Benjamin. They arrive at the marketplace, or the administrative marketplace, and Joseph sees them. And in response, he tells the caretaker of his house to prepare a feast because these men will be dining with him at noontime. There's no exchange between the brothers and Joseph at this juncture. Perhaps he just sees them from a distance as they arrive to start looking to buy more food. So the caretaker, or the chief servant of Joseph, brings the brothers into Joseph's household, or into his house, and they're scared. They think they're going to be accused of stealing the money that somehow ended up in their saddlebags after the first purchase. So they explain things to the chief attendant, and the chief attendant says, "Don't worry." And he speaks a bit enigmatically, talking about how God has put a hidden treasure into your saddlebags. Basically, it's acknowledgement by Joseph's attendant that everything's according to God's plan and is going according to plan. So the servant, or the chief attendant, brings some refreshments for the brothers, starts making the feast, and the brothers unpack the tribute. And they bow down to him again. I think they bowed to him the first time when they come to purchase grain, but they're bowing down to him again. And so this is a fulfillment of at least part of Joseph's dreams. Well, so Joseph inquires, is your father still alive? In other words, his father. And is this Benjamin person, is this your brother? And it's just too much for Joseph. He starts to cry. He starts to get all flustered. He runs into another room, wipes off his face, and returns. And so they eat the feast. It's interesting to note that Joseph eats by himself. It's in the same house, probably different tables in the same large dining room. Well, so Joseph is eating alone, or at least at his own table, just because of his stature. But it's interesting to note that the Egyptian servants eat by themselves as well. Although it's not stated specifically in the text, one can construe or infer that the Egyptians were vegetarians because of the Hebrews eating the abomination, or an abomination. Well, so they all sit down to eat. Joseph's by himself because of his stature, his status. The Egyptian attendants eat by themselves because, for whatever reason, the Egyptians won't eat alongside of the Hebrews. Major difference in diet. One possibility is that the Hebrews ate sheep, and in Egypt, the totem animal, or their constellation, or their godlike animal, was a sheep. And the brothers are sitting at their own table. To everybody's astonishment, Joseph seats the brothers according to their seniority. And he gives Benjamin, the youngest, a portion 5 times the size of everybody else's. So the brothers are flipping out. They just don't know what to make of this. I'm like, who is this character? But things lighten up. They describe the brothers drinking with Joseph and that they get drunk. So they feast. In the morning, Joseph instructs his attendant to fill the saddlebags again, to put the money back in the saddlebags, and to put Joseph's special goblet into the saddlebag of the youngest, not Benjamin. And he tells the attendant to wait until they leave the city and then to chase after them and to say so-and-so. So this happens, and the attendant accuses them of stealing the goblet, and the brothers claim their innocence. There's no way we would steal a special silver goblet. And they say, the one with whom it's found shall be put to death. And the rest of them would become the slaves of Joseph. But the attendant softens the tone, and he says, well, the one that has stolen the goblet will be a slave, but the rest of you will be free. So the attendant starts with the eldest and then ends up with Benjamin and finds the goblet there. It's interesting there's no mention of him finding the returned money this time around. They return to Egypt, to Joseph, who says, why have you done this? Why have you stolen my goblet? And so Judah speaks up, and he says, what can we say? This is a result of God finally visiting us with a punishment that we deserve. And we're happy to be slaves the rest of our lives. We're willing to suffer the punishment. But Joseph says, no, that's not necessary. The person who stole my goblet shall be my slave, but the rest of you are free to go. And this is it. This is the end of this Torah portion. It's a real cliffhanger. I mean, what's going to happen? You get a hint from Judah standing up and beginning to interact with Joseph. After all, it's his responsibility to bring Benjamin back, because that's the only way that Jacob would have agreed to send them all down, was in response to Judah stating that he would be a guarantee for Benjamin to return. Now, the psychedelic part of things, well, it has to do with dreams. It has to do with how to interpret dreams. And it has to do with the power of accurately interpreting a dream. So I think the more we know how to learn from our visions, the more we can make use of them. That's the whole thing. It isn't just that you have these wild experiences, but it's that you can make something of them. And it isn't simply to feel in your visions, to have a great feeling of awe or reverence or fear or terror or bliss or what have you. It isn't just about feelings, and it isn't just about the aesthetics of the visions either. I mean, Joseph and the Pharaoh could have said, wow, man, those dreams were really interesting and beautiful and confusing. But instead, he inquired to all of the wise men of the country and said, what do these dreams mean? And look where the proper interpretation of those dreams unfolded. Egypt was spared the worst of the famine. The brothers came down and got reconciled, as we'll see in the next Torah portion. So a lot can ride, or a lot does ride, on the proper interpretation of visions, in the same way that the proper interpretation of dreams has significant impact. Okay, so that's the end of Mikeitz, and we're winding down the book of Genesis. Vayigash is the next Torah portion. It starts with verse 18 of chapter 44, and there's only 50 chapters in the book of Genesis, so we're approaching the end of this story. So if you like this video, why don't you like it and subscribe to my channel, and until next time, thanks.